"You have no place beside a lady of this house, Amelia, and certainly not beside a widow whom society has already forgotten." The words fell across the chapel courtyard before the eyes of servants, guests, and several families who had arrived for the winter gathering at Ashcombe. Lady Corisande Vale stood beneath the stone archway with a silver-tipped cane in her gloved hand, her expression calm enough to make the cruelty sound like a simple household decision. In Amelia's hands was a small bouquet of winter flowers gathered from the edge of the garden wall. They were not rare blossoms from a London florist. They were humble flowers, tied with plain thread, meant for a woman who had spent months sitting alone behind the dark windows of a small village house after losing her husband. The widow, Eleanor Whitmore, stood nearby with lowered eyes. A few people laughed, not loudly at first, only the quiet laughter of those who wished to prove they understood which side of the room they belonged to. Lady Corisande looked at the bouquet as if it was something unpleasant. "You embarrass this family by pretending kindness is equal to rank," she said. "A woman who has lost her fortune does not need flowers. She needs to remember her place." The laughter grew. Amelia felt every face around her become another locked door. Yet she did not lower the flowers. She had known humiliation before, but she had never expected cruelty to wear such polished manners. Behind the chapel's tall wooden doors, where the winter light entered through narrow glass panes, the Duke of Valancrest had been watching. He had not heard every word, but he had seen enough. And on that cold afternoon at Ashcombe, while everyone believed they were witnessing a young woman's disgrace, none of them knew they had just watched the first moment of a truth that would one day shake the entire family. Before we return to the beginning of Amelia's story, tell us where you are listening from today. If you enjoy stories of hidden injustice, forgotten dignity, and justice finally revealed, consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you never miss a new tale. Your support helps these stories continue to reach more listeners who believe that kindness still matters. Now, let us return to the beginning, before the flowers, before the whispers, and before the Duke understood what he had truly witnessed. 3 months earlier, Amelia Rosalind Hartwell had still lived beneath the roof of Ashcombe Manor, though she had long understood that a roof did not always mean a home. The manor had belonged to her father, Lord Edmund Hartwell, until his death during the previous winter. He had been a quiet man, respected by his neighbours, but often absent from the lives of those closest to him. His days had belonged to estate ledgers, hunting appointments, and the expectations placed upon a gentleman of his position. His daughter had learned early that silence could become a habit passed from one generation to another. Amelia was 23 when her father died. She was not the wealthy heiress that many families would have welcomed. She was not the son that her father's advisers had hoped would inherit the strength of the estate. She was simply the daughter who had remained. After the funeral, when the candles burned low and the last visitors departed, the atmosphere of Ashcombe changed. The warmth of the household seemed to disappear first. The servants who once greeted Amelia with affection began waiting for instructions from Lady Corisande instead. The fires in the smaller rooms were reduced. The invitations that once arrived through the front entrance became fewer. The conversations stopped whenever Amelia entered. It was not an open attack, not at the beginning. It was something more careful, a gradual reminder that her position had become uncertain. Lady Corisande had married Amelia's father only 2 years before his death. She was elegant, intelligent, and admired in society. She knew exactly how to speak with kindness while creating damage that could not easily be challenged. She had arrived at Ashcombe with expensive tastes and a clear understanding of power. The estate needed a future, she often told visitors. The family name needed protection. The household needed discipline. But beneath those careful phrases was a simpler desire. Lady Corisande wanted control over Ashcombe, its accounts, and every decision connected to the Hartwell name. The greatest obstacle was not Amelia's presence. It was the possibility that Amelia still mattered. In the locked library of Ashcombe, behind shelves of old books and a heavy oak desk, there were documents that Lady Corisande had never allowed Amelia to examine. Papers relating to her father's property, papers connected to money set aside for Amelia's future. Whenever Amelia asked about them, Lady Corisande offered the same gentle answer. "My dear, grief has made you anxious. Your father trusted me to manage such matters, but Amelia had begun noticing small things. A solicitor's letter that disappeared before she could read it, a household account book returned with pages missing, a conversation that stopped when she approached. She had no proof, only the feeling that something valuable had been taken from her while everyone expected her to be grateful. The first time Amelia truly understood her danger came not in the library, but near the servants' corridor. She had gone there one evening because the main staircase was being prepared for guests. As she passed the narrow hallway, she heard voices beyond a half-open door. It was not unusual for servants to speak there, but the voices belonged to Lady Corisande and Mr. Halbrook, the family solicitor. Amelia stopped. She did not intend to listen, yet the mention of her own name held her in place. She heard Lady Corisande say that the girl had too much attachment to the past. Then Mr. Halbrook answered that certain arrangements would require Amelia's cooperation. There was a pause, a long pause. Then Lady Corisande spoke again. She does not need to understand every detail. She only needs to believe she has no other choice. Amelia stepped away before she heard more. That night, she did not cry. She did not confront Lady Corisande. For the first time in her life, Amelia understood that innocence alone could not protect her. She needed knowledge, and she needed allies. The first person she thought of was Eleanor Whitmore. The widow lived in a modest stone cottage beyond the village road, far from the grand rooms of Ashcombe. Before her husband died, Eleanor had been welcomed at local gatherings because her family had once held a respectable position. But after her husband's debts became known, society moved away from her as quickly as people moved away from a poor family asking for help. Amelia had met her by chance during a rainy afternoon near the village market. She had seen Eleanor struggling with a basket of supplies, while several people walked past without offering assistance. It was not a dramatic moment. No crowd gathered. No one announced their cruelty. Sometimes rejection appeared in smaller forms, a person waiting alone, a door closing quietly, a greeting that was no longer returned. Amelia carried the basket home for her that day. After that, she visited regularly. She brought books. She brought simple flowers from the garden. She brought conversation. The flowers became important because Eleanor had once told her that after her husband died, nobody brought anything living into her house anymore. The wealthy brought condolences. The poor brought kindness. The difference was often remembered. Amelia did not know that her visits had been noticed. She did not know that Lady Corisande viewed Eleanor as a dangerous connection, not because Eleanor had power, but because Eleanor had memory. She had known Amelia's father before his second marriage. She knew the household before Lady Corisande's influence grew. And she knew that Lord Edmund Hartwell had once spoken about protecting his daughter's future. One evening, Eleanor reached beneath an old wooden box and removed a folded piece of paper. She did not hand it over immediately. She looked toward the window first. The rain tapped against the glass. Then she said that some truths survived only because ordinary people had the courage to keep them. Amelia looked at the paper. The edge was worn. The seal was broken. But the handwriting on the outside belonged to her father. For the first time in months, hope appeared. Not the foolish hope that everything would suddenly become easy. A quieter hope, the kind that came when a person finally realized they were not standing alone. Yet Eleanor did not give her the letter. Not that night. She told Amelia there was another matter she needed to confirm first. A name, a payment, a connection hidden in the estate accounts. And somewhere inside Ashcombe Manor, someone had already discovered that Amelia had begun asking questions. The following morning, Lady Corisande sent for her. The invitation was polite. The message was short. Amelia was to meet her in the library before the evening guests arrived. When Amelia entered the room, she found the door already locked behind her. On the desk sat a document. Beside it was a pen. And beside the pen was the same expression Lady Corisande had worn when she first arrived at Ashcombe, a smile that looked like mercy, but carried the weight of a threat. Amelia looked down at the paper and saw the line where her name waited for her signature. She did not yet know what the document would cost her, but she understood one thing. The flowers she had given to a lonely widow had revealed an enemy who was willing to risk everything to keep the truth buried. Amelia did not reach for the pen. For several moments, She simply looked at the document, resting beneath the warm glow of the library candles. The room was familiar. She had spent countless hours there as a child, sitting near the shelves while her father read correspondence at his desk. Back then, the locked drawers had represented nothing more than a gentleman's private affairs. Now they represented everything she was not allowed to know. Lady Corisande watched her carefully from the opposite side of the desk. "You appear uncertain, my dear," she said. "I hope you are not allowing village gossip to disturb your judgment." Amelia lifted her eyes. "I have learned that uncertainty often arrives when people are prevented from seeing the truth." The slight movement of Lady Corisande's hand was the only sign that the answer had struck deeper than expected. The older woman recovered quickly. "Such dramatic thoughts are exactly why you require guidance. Your father was a respected man, but he was not always practical. He left responsibilities behind. Responsibilities that must now be handled by someone with experience." Amelia looked down again. The document was written with careful language. It did not say she was surrendering her rights. It did not say she was being removed from her own home. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it spoke of assistance, guardianship, and family harmony. Beautiful words, dangerous words. She remembered what Eleanor had told her. The most effective chains were often the ones people called protection. Amelia placed her fingers lightly on the edge of the paper. "May I ask why this requires my signature today?" Lady Corisande's expression softened. "Because tonight we have guests, important guests. The Duke of Valancrest may visit the chapel gathering, and the last thing this family requires is uncertainty surrounding your position." The name caught Amelia's attention. The Duke of Valancrest. She knew little about him beyond reputation. He was considered a man of discipline, careful with money, and rarely involved in the small dramas of society. Unlike many gentlemen of his rank, he did not spend every evening seeking admiration in London drawing rooms. Lady Corisande noticed her pause. "Do not mistake his presence for rescue," she said quietly. "Men of his position value stability above sentiment." Amelia did not answer, because she understood something important. Lady Corisande had not mentioned the Duke to comfort her. She had mentioned him to remind her that powerful people were watching. Or perhaps, Amelia thought, to make her afraid that they were. She folded the document closed. "I would prefer to read this properly before signing." The silence that followed was immediate. Not anger, not yet. Something colder. The kind of silence that revealed a person had just failed to obey an expectation. Lady Corisande slowly stood. "Of course, you are your father's daughter, after all." The words sounded like praise, but Amelia heard the warning beneath them. When she left the library, she did not feel victorious. She felt the weight of what she had done. For the first time, she had openly refused the woman who controlled the household. For the first time, she had chosen caution over obedience. It was not a grand rebellion, it was a small step. But it was the first time in her life that Amelia had protected herself without asking permission. That evening, the household changed again. The servants moved faster. The fireplaces burned brighter. The dining tables were prepared with unusual care because several guests from neighboring estates were expected. Amelia noticed how quickly reputation could restore warmth to a house. Rooms that had felt cold for weeks suddenly became welcoming. People who had barely spoken to her now offered polite greetings, but she saw through it. The kindness was not for her, it was for the guests. As she walked through the corridor near the servants' quarters, she heard a familiar voice. Mrs. Finch, the elderly housekeeper, was speaking with one of the younger maids. The girl was worried. She had been instructed not to mention certain household matters. Mrs. Finch told her that silence had protected many people for too long. Amelia stopped near the doorway. Mrs. Finch noticed her. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then the old housekeeper lowered her head. "Forgive me, Miss Hartwell. I did not mean for you to hear." Amelia stepped closer. "Perhaps it is time I heard things I was never meant to hear." Mrs. Finch looked toward the empty hallway. She had served the Hartwell family for 30 years. She had known Amelia as a child. She had watched Lord Edmund carry his daughter through the garden after she fell from a tree. She had seen his affection. But she had also seen his weakness. "Your father was not cruel," Mrs. Finch said softly. but he was often afraid of conflict. There are people who do terrible things, and there are people who allow them to happen because stopping them requires courage. The words hurt more than Amelia expected, because she had spent months blaming Lady Corisande alone. She had not wanted to admit that her father's silence had created the space where another person could take control. Mrs. Finch reached into the pocket of her apron and removed a small brass key. This belonged to the old writing cabinet in the library. Amelia stared at it. "Why give it to me now?" "Because I should have given it sooner." The old woman's voice trembled. "Your father left instructions before his death. Not official instructions, nothing prepared for lawyers, only a personal note." Amelia felt her heartbeat quicken. "Where is it?" Mrs. Finch looked toward the upper floors. Hidden, but not hidden enough. Before Amelia could ask more, footsteps approached from the corridor. Both women fell silent. Mr. Halbrook appeared at the end of the hall. The solicitor stopped when he saw them together. His expression changed, only slightly, but Amelia noticed. A man who had nothing to hide would have looked surprised. A man who feared discovery looked prepared. "Good evening, Miss Hartwell," he said. "Good evening, Mr. Halbrook." His eyes moved briefly toward the key in her hand, only for a second, but it was enough. Amelia closed her fingers around it. The solicitor smiled politely. "I hope your conversation has been pleasant." Amelia returned the smile. "It has been very informative." That night, while music played in the drawing room and guests laughed over conversation, Amelia remained quiet. She watched Lady Corisande move among the visitors with perfect confidence. She watched Mr. Halbrook avoid looking toward her. And she watched through the tall windows as the Duke of Valancrest arrived at the chapel grounds for the evening gathering. He stepped down from his carriage beneath the cold winter sky. He was not there for Amelia. He did not know her struggle. He did not know about the locked library. He did not know about the document waiting for her signature. But when he entered the chapel and glanced across the room, he noticed the young woman standing apart from the others. Not because she looked weak, because she looked like someone who had been forced to become strong too quickly. And for reasons he could not yet explain, the Duke remembered her face. Later that evening, after the guests departed, Amelia returned to the library. The house was quiet. The candles were nearly gone. She used the brass key on the old writing cabinet hidden behind the lower shelves. Inside was not wealth, not jewelry, not a forgotten fortune. Only a thin bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. The first letter carried her father's handwriting. But before Amelia could open it, she noticed something else beneath the papers, a small account book. And on the first page was a name she had never expected to see connected with Ashcombe, Eleanor Whitmore. Amelia turned the page. The numbers revealed a secret that reached far beyond a stolen document. And for the first time, she understood that Lady Corisande had not simply wanted control of Ashcombe. She had been trying to erase a debt that could destroy everything she had built. Amelia remained in the library long after the last candle on the desk had burned halfway down. The account book rested before her. The letters rested beside it. Two pieces of her father's past that had been deliberately kept away from her. She had expected anger. She had expected betrayal. But what she felt most strongly was something quieter, disappointment, because every page reminded her that the people around her had known more than she did. They had made decisions about her future while she was still being treated as a child inside her own home. She turned the account book carefully. The handwriting was not her father's. It belonged to someone who had recorded payments over several years. The entries were precise. Dates, amounts, names. At first they seemed ordinary. Repairs to the estate, household expenses, payments to suppliers. Then Amelia noticed the repeated transfers, small sums, always sent away, always connected to the same name, Eleanor Whitmore. She frowned. The widow she had helped, the woman society had abandoned, the woman Lady Corisande considered insignificant. Why would her name appear in Ashcombe's private accounts? Amelia opened the first letter. The paper had aged, but the handwriting remained clear. My dear Edmund, I hope you will forgive me for writing this after so many years. I have delayed because pride often prevents people from asking for what is rightfully theirs. But my husband's affairs have left me with little choice. Amelia stopped. She read the sentence again, not because she did not understand, because she understood too well. Eleanor had not been asking for charity. She had been asking for something owed. The second paragraph explained that before his death, Eleanor's husband had invested money into one of Lord Hartwell's estate projects. It had been a private agreement based on trust rather than formal recognition. The money had helped save Ashcombe during a difficult period. But after Eleanor's husband died, the repayment had never been completed. Amelia looked back at the account book. The payments were there, small payments, hidden payments, not enough to restore what had been taken, only enough to keep someone quiet. A cold feeling moved through her. Lady Corisande had not merely disliked Eleanor because she was poor. She feared her because Eleanor knew a truth that could prove the Hartwell estate had been protected by a woman society now ignored. The irony was almost unbearable. The person Lady Corisande wanted forgotten had helped preserve the very wealth she was trying to control. Amelia reached for another letter. This one was from her father. The first line made her hands tremble. "My daughter must never believe that her worth depends upon an inheritance." She stopped reading. For several moments, she could not continue, not because the words were painful, because they were the first words from her father that felt like they had reached her. She continued. He wrote that he had always regretted not teaching Amelia more about the estate. He wrote that he had mistaken protection for preparation. He wrote that a daughter who understood nothing about her own affairs could easily become a woman controlled by others. The letter ended with a sentence that stayed with her. A person who is denied knowledge is not protected. They are made powerless. Amelia closed her eyes. The room was silent. No servants, no guests, no one telling her what she should think. For the first time since her father's death, she allowed herself to feel something other than grief. Resolve. The next morning, Amelia did not go to the breakfast room. She went to the village. It was a small decision, but it changed everything. Before, she had always walked through the village as Lord Hartwell's daughter. People bowed, people stepped aside, people judged her, according to the name she carried. That morning she walked there as Amelia, a woman with questions, a woman who needed answers. She met Eleanor at the small cottage near the edge of the road. The widow was surprised to see her so early. When Amelia placed the account book on the table, Eleanor's expression changed immediately. "Where did you find that?" Amelia sat down. "In my father's cabinet." Eleanor looked toward the window. "For years, I wondered if that book would ever be seen again. You knew it existed? I knew your father kept records. But after Lady Corisande came to Ashcombe, everything changed." Amelia listened carefully. Eleanor explained that after Lord Edmund's death, she had tried to contact the estate. Her letters were unanswered, then returned, then disappeared completely. She had eventually stopped trying. Not because she believed Lady Corisande was right, because she had no one willing to stand beside her. Amelia looked at the woman across from her. "How long did you wait?" Eleanor gave a faint smile, long enough to learn that society remembers a widow's mistakes longer than her kindness. The words remained between them. Amelia understood them. She had seen how quickly people could change their behavior when someone lost protection. Today, it was Eleanor. Tomorrow, it could be her. Before Amelia left the cottage, Eleanor held her arm. "There is something else you should know." Amelia turned. "Your father was not the only person who knew about those accounts." "Who else?" Eleanor hesitated. "Lady Corisande." A silence filled the small room. Then Amelia asked the question she already knew the answer to. "She knew before she married him." Eleanor nodded. That was why she wanted control so quickly after his death. She needed the papers before anyone else found them. Amelia returned to Ashcombe with a new understanding. Lady Corisande's actions were not random. Every insult, every restriction, every attempt to isolate her. They had all served one purpose: to make Amelia leave, to make her abandon the house before she discovered the truth. That evening, Amelia attended dinner. Lady Corisande appeared pleased, perhaps because Amelia had returned, perhaps because she believed the pressure had worked. "You have been unusually quiet today," she remarked. Amelia lifted her glass. "I have been thinking. A dangerous habit in uncertain times," Lady Corisande replied. Amelia looked directly at her. Only for those who prefer others not to think. The conversation at the table stopped, only briefly, but everyone noticed. Across the room, Mr. Halbrook lowered his eyes, and at the far end of the table, Lord Valancrest, who had remained as a guest after the chapel gathering, watched without speaking. He noticed something different about Amelia. She was still polite, still composed, but she was no longer asking permission to exist. After dinner, Lady Corisande made another attempt. She approached Amelia privately near the staircase. "You seem to have developed confidence rather suddenly." Amelia looked at the candle flame between them. "No, I have simply stopped confusing obedience with respect." Lady Corisande's expression hardened. "Be careful, Amelia. You are standing on the edge of something you do not understand." Amelia held her gaze. "Perhaps, but I am no longer standing in the dark." For the first time, Lady Corisande looked uncertain, only for a moment, but Amelia saw it. And that small crack in her confidence was enough. Later that night, Amelia returned to her room and found something placed beneath her door. A folded piece of paper, no name, no signature, only one sentence written inside. "If you wish to know what happened to your father's final instructions, look beneath the chapel floor before the next gathering." Amelia read it twice. Then she looked toward the dark window. Someone inside Ashcombe was helping her, or someone was leading her toward a trap. And before morning arrived, Amelia would have to decide whether the unknown hand reaching toward her was offering the truth or preparing to bury her with it. Amelia did not sleep. The candle beside her bed burned until the wax had melted into a small pool on the silver tray. Outside, the winter rain continued against the glass, and the wind moved through the old branches surrounding Ashcombe like a warning whispered from the dark. She read the message again. "If you wish to know what happened to your father's final instructions, look beneath the chapel floor before the next gathering." The words seemed simple, but Amelia had learned that simple words could hide complicated dangers. Someone knew about her father's instructions. Someone knew about the chapel. Someone knew enough to reach her without being seen. She considered every person in the household. Mrs. Finch had given her the key. Eleanor had protected the account book. Mr. Halbrook feared discovery. Lady Corisande wanted silence. And the Duke of Valancrest— Amelia stopped herself. She barely knew him. A gentleman of his position would have little reason to involve himself in the private troubles of Ashcombe. Men like the Duke lived among matters far larger than a young woman's struggle against her stepmother. Yet she remembered the way he had watched during the chapel gathering. Not with amusement, not with the careless curiosity of a guest observing a family dispute, with attention, as if he had noticed something others ignored. Amelia placed the note beside her father's letter. For years, she had believed that surviving required staying unnoticed. Now she understood something different. Sometimes remaining invisible only allowed others to write your story for you. The following morning, she waited until the household became busy preparing for the next evening's gathering. Lady Corisande had arranged another event at the chapel. Several families from nearby estates were expected to attend, including important names from the county. Amelia understood the purpose. A public gathering created pressure. If she appeared uncertain, Lady Corisande could present her as emotional and unstable. If she resisted openly, she could be accused of damaging the family reputation. The room itself could become a weapon. The same room where people laughed at others could also decide who was believed. Before leaving for the chapel, Amelia found Mrs. Finch near the kitchen entrance. The old housekeeper immediately noticed something was wrong. "You found something, did you not?" Amelia did not ask how she knew. Instead, she showed her the note. Mrs. Finch's face changed, not with surprise, with fear. "Who gave this to you?" "I do not know." The housekeeper looked toward the corridor. Then she lowered her voice. "Miss Hartwell, there are things in this house that have been hidden for longer than Lady Corisande has lived here." Amelia folded the note. "Do you know what is beneath the chapel floor?" Mrs. Finch hesitated. "I know your father used to keep certain papers there before the library was changed." "Changed?" After Lady Corisande arrived, several rooms were rearranged. Certain locks were replaced. Certain servants were dismissed. She looked ashamed. "I should have spoken sooner." Amelia shook her head. No, you were afraid. The old woman looked at her. And you are not. Amelia looked toward the cold windows. Yes. The answer came easily. But fear is not the same as surrender. It was the first time she had said the words aloud, and hearing them made them real. That afternoon, Amelia entered the chapel alone. The building stood at the edge of the estate grounds, separated from the manor by a long path lined with bare trees. The stone walls held the cold, and the wooden benches carried the scent of old dust and candle smoke. It had once been a place where the Hartwell family celebrated marriages and remembered the dead. Now it felt like a place where secrets waited. She walked slowly toward the front. The floor beneath the old wooden benches was uneven in places. She searched carefully, not because she expected a hidden treasure, because she had learned that truth was usually kept in ordinary places. Behind a loose section of wood near the side wall, she found a small metal container. Her hands became still. For a moment, she did not open it. She thought of her father. She thought of the years she had spent believing that adults always knew what was best. Then she lifted the lid. Inside was a sealed envelope, and beneath it was a smaller piece of paper. The handwriting belonged to her father, Amelia. If you are reading this, then I have failed to protect you while I was alive. But I hope I have not failed completely. Her breath caught. She continued reading. The letter explained that Lord Edmund had discovered irregularities in the estate accounts shortly before his death. He had suspected that money connected to Eleanor Whitmore's agreement had been deliberately hidden. But he had also discovered something more troubling. The changes had begun before his illness. Someone had been preparing for his absence. Someone had expected Amelia to have no protection after he was gone. The final lines were unfinished. The ink appeared darker there, as if he had written them with urgency. Trust the person who values truth over comfort. Do not trust the person who offers peace by demanding silence. A sound interrupted her. A footstep. Amelia quickly folded the letter. She turned. At the entrance of the chapel stood the Duke of Valancrest. For a moment, neither spoke. The winter light fell between them, not separating them, simply revealing them. "I apologize, Miss Hartwell," the Duke said. "I did not intend to intrude." Amelia held the envelope close. "Yet, you came here." His eyes moved briefly toward the loose floorboard. "I was told there might be something worth seeing." "By whom?" The Duke did not answer immediately. That hesitation told Amelia more than an immediate reply would have. Before he could explain, another sound came from outside. A carriage, then voices. Someone else was approaching. The Duke looked toward the door. "If Lady Corisande finds you here with those papers, she will not ask questions before making accusations." Amelia looked at him carefully. "You know her well. I know how carefully people protect what they fear losing." The answer was not a confession, but it was not a denial either. Amelia placed the letter inside her coat. Then she made a decision. For months, she had been reacting to other people's choices, being moved, being controlled, being spoken for. Not anymore. She stepped toward the chapel entrance. "If Lady Corisande wishes to accuse me, she may do so with the truth in the room." The Duke watched her, and for the first time, he saw not the quiet daughter of Lord Hartwell who had been pushed aside. He saw a woman who had finally discovered the strength she had carried all along. But neither Amelia nor the Duke knew that the person approaching the chapel was not Lady Corisande. It was Mr. Halbrook. And in his hand was a document that could either destroy Amelia's last chance or expose the person who had been controlling Ashcombe from the shadows. Mr. Halbrook entered the chapel with a careful expression, but Amelia noticed that his composure was not the same as before. The confident solicitor who had spoken beside Lady Corisande's desk now appeared as a man carrying a burden he could no longer hide. He stopped when he saw the Duke. "Your Grace." The greeting was polite, too polite. The kind of politeness used when a person suddenly realizes they are no longer speaking to someone they can easily influence. The Duke regarded him calmly. "Mr. Halbrook." A silence followed. The chapel seemed colder than before. Amelia held the sealed envelope inside her coat and watched the solicitor's eyes move toward it, only briefly. "But enough. You know what I have found," she said. Mr. Halbrook looked at her. "Miss Hartwell, I believe you misunderstand the situation. No. Amelia's voice remained quiet. I believe I have spent too long misunderstanding it. The solicitor's expression tightened. He lifted the document in his hand. This is precisely why I came. There are matters that require your attention before tonight's gathering. He offered the paper toward her, but Amelia did not take it. What is it? A formal arrangement concerning your future residence. Her eyes narrowed. My future residence? The words carried more meaning than the document itself. Mr. Halbrook lowered his voice. Lady Corisande believes it would be best for everyone if you spent some time away from Ashcombe. There it was. The final step. Not an accusation. Not a punishment. A polite removal. A way to make her disappear while pretending it was for her own good. Amelia looked at the man who had once advised her father. Did you prepare this before or after my father's instructions were hidden beneath this chapel floor? The solicitor froze, only for a moment. But it was enough. The Duke noticed. So did Amelia. The truth was no longer hidden completely. It was beginning to show through the smallest cracks. Mr. Halbrook slowly lowered the document. You should be careful with what you believe, Miss Hartwell. Amelia looked at the envelope beneath her hand. I am being careful. That is what frightens you. The solicitor said nothing. Outside, the sound of approaching guests grew louder. The gathering at the chapel was beginning. Soon, the same people who had laughed when Amelia brought flowers to Eleanor Whitmore would enter these doors again. But this time, Amelia would not stand before them, empty-handed. She had a letter. She had an account book. She had witnesses. And she had finally understood that the truth did not need permission to exist. Yet as she stepped toward the chapel entrance, Mr. Halbrook's face revealed one final concern. Because the document he carried was not the only thing Lady Corisande had prepared. There was another paper waiting in Ashcombe Manor. One that could turn the entire room against Amelia before she ever spoke a single word. The chapel doors opened before Amelia could take another step. Guests entered carrying the warmth of the outside world with them. Heavy coats were removed. Gloves were adjusted. Quiet conversations filled the room as families from neighboring estates greeted one another beneath the old stone arches. The very same room where Amelia had once stood holding flowers for Eleanor. The same room where people had laughed. But this time she noticed something different. She was no longer looking at their faces, searching for approval. She was studying them. Who watched Lady Corisande too closely, who avoided Mr. Halbrook, who appeared surprised by her presence beside the Duke. Knowledge changed the way a person saw a room, and Amelia was seeing everything. Lady Corisande arrived moments later. She wore dark velvet and a calm expression. Around her neck was a string of pearls that caught the candlelight whenever she moved. She looked exactly as society expected, a respected widow of a noble estate to look, composed, elegant, untouched. But Amelia noticed the first sign of fear. Lady Corisande looked immediately toward Mr. Halbrook, not toward her, not toward the Duke, toward the solicitor. A small mistake, a revealing one. The Duke stepped aside, allowing Amelia to move forward. Lady Corisande smiled. My dear Amelia, I was beginning to wonder where you had gone. Amelia returned the greeting. I found something important. The words were simple, but they changed the air. Several guests nearby became quiet. Lady Corisande's smile remained. How interesting. She looked toward the envelope hidden beneath Amelia's coat. Perhaps we should discuss private matters privately. Amelia shook her head. No. For too long, private matters have been used to harm people who had no opportunity to answer. The room fell silent. Not complete silence. The kind of silence that came when people realized a conversation had become dangerous. Lady Corisande's expression hardened. You are upset. I understand grief can affect judgment. There it was. The suggestion. The first step toward making people doubt her. Amelia remembered the stories Eleanor had told her. How quickly society accepted that a woman was emotional when a woman became inconvenient. She looked around the room. Several guests were already waiting for Lady Corisande's version of events. Amelia understood then. The battle was not only about documents, it was about who would be believed. She reached inside her coat. Before she could remove the letter, Mr. Halbrook stepped forward. Perhaps this is not the appropriate occasion, the Duke interrupted him. I believe it is exactly the appropriate occasion. Everyone turned. The Duke's voice was calm, but his position gave his words weight. A matter involving the honor of a household should not be hidden behind closed doors if accusations are already being made. Lady Corisande looked at him. Your Grace, I assure you, there is no accusation. The Duke glanced toward the document still in Mr. Halbrook's hand. Then why does your solicitor carry an agreement intended to remove Miss Hartwell from Ashcombe? The question landed heavily. A few guests exchanged looks. Lady Corisande did not answer immediately. That pause was enough. Amelia felt something shift. Not victory. Not yet. Only an opening. A chance. Then Mr. Halbrook made his mistake. He looked toward Lady Corisande and said quietly, I told you this should have been handled before she found the letter. The moment the words left his mouth, he realized what he had done. The room changed. Lady Corisande turned toward him with disbelief. Mr. Halbrook. But it was too late. The secret had spoken before anyone could stop it. Amelia stepped forward. What letter? No one answered. She looked at Lady Corisande. The truth had always existed. You were not trying to protect Ashcombe. You were trying to control what Ashcombe could reveal. Lady Corisande's composure finally broke. Only slightly, but enough. You have no understanding of what you are dealing with. Amelia held her father's letter firmly. Then explain it. Explain why my father hid instructions. Explain why Eleanor Whitmore's name appears in the estate accounts. Explain why you tried to send me away before I discovered any of this. The guests were no longer watching a young woman being corrected. They were watching a powerful woman being questioned. And for the first time in many months, Lady Corisande did not control the room. But before she could answer, the chapel doors opened again. An elderly man entered slowly. The servants moved aside as they recognized him. He had not been seen at Ashcombe for years. The former estate steward, the man who had managed Lord Edmund Hartwell's accounts before leaving after a disagreement, and in his hand was a ledger that matched the missing pages from the estate records. The truth that had been buried was not coming from one person. It was returning piece by piece. Lady Corisande looked at the ledger, and for the first time, everyone in the chapel saw what Amelia had already understood. The woman who had spent months deciding who belonged inside Ashcombe was finally afraid that the house itself would reveal who had never truly belonged there. The former steward, Mr. Edmund Vale, stood near the entrance of the chapel with a worn leather ledger beneath his arm. Age had changed him. His shoulders were no longer straight, as they had been in the years when he managed Ashcombe's fields and accounts. His hands carried the marks of decades spent working rather than commanding, but his voice remained steady. Lord Hartwell asked me to keep these records safe if anything happened to him. A murmur moved through the chapel. Lady Corisande recovered first. An old servant's memory is hardly enough to challenge the arrangements of a respected household. Mr. Vale looked at her. I agree, Lady Corisande. He opened the ledger, which is why I brought the records. Not my memory. The pages were turned carefully. Each entry connected to another. Payments received, payments redirected. Money that should have returned to Eleanor Whitmore's family. Money that had instead been transferred through accounts connected to the household. After Lady Corisande's arrival, Amelia watched the faces around her. The guests who had once judged Eleanor without knowing her story now looked uncomfortable. Society was quick to laugh at a fallen person. It was much harder to laugh when the fallen person had been wronged. Lady Corisande stepped closer. You are accusing me of theft? Mr. Vale did not raise his voice. I am saying that Lord Hartwell believed his accounts had been manipulated. A careful answer. A truthful answer. The kind that could not easily be attacked. Mr. Halbrook looked increasingly uneasy. Lady Corisande turned toward him. You told me everything had been handled. The solicitor's face changed, because he understood the question was not meant for him to answer. It was meant for everyone else to hear. Handled. That single word revealed more than a confession would have. Amelia looked at Mr. Halbrook. You knew. The solicitor remained silent. You knew my father was investigating. Still nothing. Then you helped remove me from the house before I could find out. Mr. Halbrook lowered his eyes. I believed I was preventing a greater scandal. Amelia felt the weight of those words. Not because they surprised her, because they confirmed something she had slowly learned. People often called their cowardice responsibility. They called silence wisdom. They called surrender peace. But the result was always the same. Someone powerless paid the price. The Duke of Valancrest stepped forward. "Mr. Halbrook, you are a solicitor. Your duty was not to protect the reputation of the most powerful person in the room. It was to protect the truth." The solicitor had no answer. For several moments, the chapel remained completely still. No whispering, no movement, only the sound of rain against the old windows. Then Eleanor Whitmore entered. Amelia had not expected her there. The widow stood near the doorway, wearing a simple dark coat. She looked uncomfortable among the wealthy families who filled the chapel, but she did not look afraid. Lady Corisande stared at her. "You." Eleanor met her gaze. "Yes, me. The woman you believed no one would listen to." The words were quiet, but they carried. Eleanor walked forward and placed a small bundle of letters beside the ledger. "These were the letters I sent to Ashcombe after my husband died." The room watched as she untied the ribbon. The letters had never reached Lord Hartwell. Some had been returned, some had disappeared, but the dates remained, the evidence remained. Amelia looked at the papers. Another piece of the truth, another door that had been locked and was now opening. Lady Corisande's expression finally lost its perfect control. "You think this changes everything?" She looked around the room. "Do you truly believe society will accept this? A widow's complaints? A young woman's accusations? A former servant's ledger?" Her voice became sharper. "People do not follow truth, Amelia. They follow power." For a moment, Amelia saw the woman beneath the elegance. Not a monster. A person who had built her entire life around the belief that status could silence anyone. And perhaps that was why Lady Corisande had never understood Amelia. Because Amelia no longer needed everyone to approve of her. She only needed the truth to stand. Amelia stepped forward. Perhaps that was true once. But power changes when people stop being afraid of it. The Duke looked toward the guests, and one by one, Amelia noticed the change. An older gentleman who had remained silent earlier now moved away from Lady Corisande. A woman who had laughed during the flower incident lowered her eyes. A family that had sought Lady Corisande's friendship suddenly found reasons to stand elsewhere. The punishment had already begun, not with anger, not with revenge, with distance. The very thing Lady Corisande had used against others was now turning away from her. But before the gathering ended, Mr. Vale opened one final page of the ledger. "There is one more matter." Amelia looked at him. "What matter?" The old steward hesitated. "Your father did not only record the missing payments, he recorded his final decision regarding Ashcombe." The chapel became silent again. Lady Corisande's face changed, because she knew. She knew before anyone else. The letter Amelia carried was not the end of the secret. It was only the beginning. Mr. Vale removed a sealed paper from inside the ledger. The seal was old, but unbroken, and written across the front were the words, "For Amelia Rosalind Hartwell, when she is finally allowed to know the truth." Amelia stared at the sealed paper. For years, she had imagined that the truth would arrive loudly, a confrontation, a public accusation, a moment when the people who had doubted her would finally understand. But standing in the chapel, surrounded by the same families who had once watched her humiliation without speaking, she discovered that truth was often quieter. Sometimes it arrived as a letter, sometimes as an old ledger, sometimes as a person who had carried guilt for too long and finally decided to speak. Mr. Vale offered the sealed paper to her. "Your father asked me to keep this safe until you were ready." Amelia looked at the seal. It carried the Hartwell crest. Her fingers touched the wax but did not break it immediately. Lady Corisande watched her closely. And for the first time, Amelia understood that the woman before her was not afraid of what the letter might say. She was afraid because Amelia had the choice to open it. That choice had been taken from her for months. Her decisions had been replaced. Her voice had been softened into silence. Her future had been arranged by people who believed they knew better. Now, for the first time since her father's death, the next step belonged only to her. She broke the seal. The paper inside was longer than she expected. The handwriting was familiar. "My dearest Amelia, If this letter has reached you, then I fear I was unable to correct the mistakes I made while I still had time." She paused. The room disappeared around her. There was only the voice of a father she had spent months believing had left her alone. The letter explained that Lord Edmund Hartwell had discovered the financial irregularities shortly before his illness became severe. He had intended to speak openly, but his health declined faster than expected. He admitted that he had trusted the wrong people, not because they had always deceived him, but because he had wanted to believe that respectable appearances meant respectable intentions, a painful lesson, one he had learned too late. He wrote that Lady Corisande had approached him with suggestions about protecting the estate's future. At first, he believed she was simply a practical woman, concerned with stability. But gradually, he noticed that every suggestion led toward one result: more control, more secrecy, more dependence upon her. The letter then revealed the decision he had made before his death. Ashcombe was not to be placed under another person's complete authority. Amelia was to have access to the estate records and the right to oversee matters concerning her own inheritance, not because she was his daughter, but because he believed she was capable. The words affected her more deeply than she expected. Capable. It was a simple word. Yet for months, everyone around her had treated her as though she were fragile, too young, too emotional, too inexperienced. They had not protected her. They had reduced her. Amelia lowered the letter for a moment. The chapel remained silent. Even Lady Corisande had nothing to say. Then Amelia continued reading. The final paragraph was written differently, as if her father had stopped and considered every word. "My daughter, there will be people who tell you that a woman's safety comes from obedience. They will tell you that a quiet life is the same as a good life. Do not believe them. A person may be gentle and still be strong. A person may forgive and still remember." Amelia folded the letter. She did not cry. Not because she did not feel pain. Because the pain had finally found somewhere to go. It became understanding. Lady Corisande spoke first. "Your father was ill. Illness changes people. You cannot know whether those thoughts reflected his true judgment." Amelia looked at her. "No, I cannot know every thought my father had. But I know what he wrote, and I know what you tried to hide." The guests watched, not as an audience waiting for entertainment, as witnesses. Lady Corisande took a step forward. "You believe this makes you powerful?" Amelia shook her head. "No, that is the difference between us." The room became still. "You wanted power over people. I only wanted the right to decide my own life." The Duke of Valancrest observed the exchange quietly. He understood then why Amelia's kindness toward Eleanor had mattered. It had not been a simple act of charity. It had revealed who she was when no one was rewarding her. And that was something money, titles, and reputation could never manufacture. The gathering slowly began to change. People who had arrived expecting another family dispute now found themselves reconsidering every assumption they had made. One by one, conversations shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Lady Corisande saw it happening. The doors that had always opened for her were beginning to close, not because someone had ordered them closed, because people had seen enough. Mr. Halbrook approached Amelia after the guests began leaving. His face carried exhaustion. "I owe you an apology." Amelia looked at him. For what? For believing that protecting a reputation was more important than protecting a person. The honesty surprised her, but it did not erase what had happened. "You chose silence when my father needed someone to speak." The solicitor lowered his head. "Yes, and I will carry that regret." Amelia accepted the apology with a small nod, but she did not offer comfort he had not earned. Forgiveness, she realized, did not always mean returning things to the way they were. Sometimes it meant allowing the truth to exist without carrying anger forever. Outside the chapel, the rain had stopped. The clouds remained heavy, but a thin line of pale winter light appeared above the trees. For the first time in months, Amelia walked back toward Ashcombe, without feeling like a guest in her own home. But the victory was not complete. The papers had revealed Lady Corisande's actions. They had not yet revealed the full consequences, because one final question remained. What would happen when the woman who had controlled Ashcombe realized she had lost the ability to control Amelia. The answer came slowly, not with applause, not with a sudden wave of sympathy, but with the uncomfortable silence of people who had finally been forced to look directly at the choices they had made. The grand hall of Ashcombe was prepared as it had been prepared for generations. The chandelier burned above the guests. The silver trays carried carefully arranged refreshments. The servants moved quietly along the walls. The musicians waited near the windows. From the outside, it appeared to be another gathering of the English aristocracy. But Amelia knew that appearances were no longer enough. The same room that had once watched her humiliation would now witness the truth. 3 months earlier, she had entered rooms at Ashcombe, hoping others would allow her to remain. Tonight, she entered them knowing she had never needed permission to belong. The guests arrived one by one. Some greeted her warmly. Some offered apologies before she had even spoken. Others avoided her gaze, hoping silence might erase their previous actions. But Amelia noticed everything. She noticed the families who had once stood beside Lady Corisande and now stood carefully apart. She noticed the people who had laughed when Eleanor Whitmore was treated as though she no longer mattered. She noticed the servants who looked relieved that the truth had finally reached the place where it belonged. A household carried its secrets differently after they were revealed. Before, secrets lived in whispers. Afterward, they lived in memory. When Lady Corisande entered the hall, the conversations softened. She still looked every inch the woman society had admired. Her gown was elegant, her posture remained perfect, her expression remained controlled. But Amelia saw the difference. The confidence was gone. Not completely. Lady Corisande was too proud to surrender easily. But the certainty that had once surrounded her had disappeared. For months, she had believed she could decide what people knew, what they believed, who they trusted. Now she stood among people who had seen the truth without her permission. The greatest loss for a person who relied on control was discovering that others had begun making their own decisions. Amelia waited until everyone had gathered. Then she stepped forward. The room slowly became quiet. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. For the first time in her life, people were listening because they wanted to hear her, not because they were waiting for someone else to speak. I asked you all here because Ashcombe has carried an injustice for too long. Her eyes moved across the room. There were faces that remembered the day in the chapel, faces that remembered Eleanor standing alone, faces that remembered Amelia holding flowers while others laughed. This is not a gathering to destroy anyone. It is not a celebration of another person's downfall. It is a moment to correct what was hidden. She paused. My father's final wishes were not respected. Important records were concealed. A rightful agreement was ignored. And a woman who had already suffered loss was left without justice because those who held influence believed silence would be easier than honesty. No one interrupted. The silence itself became an answer. Amelia turned toward Eleanor. The widow stood near the back of the room. She still looked uncomfortable among so many wealthy families. But she no longer looked invisible. Eleanor stepped forward. The room watched. Some people watched because they were curious. Some because they were ashamed. But everyone watched. The documents were presented. The agreement between Eleanor's late husband and Ashcombe was shown. The estate records were examined. The hidden payments were explained. Mr. Vale spoke calmly, describing the records he had preserved after Lord Edmund's concerns. His voice was not dramatic. He did not need to make the truth more powerful than it already was. The truth had survived long enough. Then Mr. Halbrook stepped forward, the solicitor who had once stood beside Lady Corisande, the man who had helped create the appearance that Amelia had no choice. His hands trembled slightly. I confirm these documents are genuine. A murmur moved through the hall. Lady Corisande turned toward him. You would do this now? The question was quiet, but everyone heard it. Mr. Halbrook lowered his head. I should have done it before. The answer carried more weight than any excuse. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then the Duke of Valancrest stepped forward. He had remained silent through much of the evening, not because he had nothing to say, because he understood that this was Amelia's moment. But now his voice carried through the hall. A person's title does not make them honorable. Their choices do. The guests listened. A gentleman may possess land, a lady may possess influence, but neither gives anyone the right to remove another person's voice. Lady Corisande looked at him. Perhaps she expected anger, perhaps she expected condemnation. Instead, she found something worse, a simple judgment. The truth, the same truth she had spent years trying to avoid. An older gentleman among the guests stepped forward, Lord Everard. Amelia remembered him. He had been present during many gatherings at Ashcombe. He had laughed when Eleanor's situation was discussed. He had watched when Amelia was treated as though she had become a burden. He looked uncomfortable. That discomfort was deserved. Lady Hartwell. The title surprised Amelia, not because she had never heard it, because it was the first time someone had used it without reminding her of what she had lost. "I owe you an apology." The room remained quiet. Lord Everard continued. "I believed what was convenient. I accepted the version of events that required the least courage from me. I saw a young woman struggling against a powerful household and assumed the powerful household must be correct." He looked toward Eleanor. "I judged someone I did not know." Then he looked back at Amelia, and I remained silent when silence caused harm. Amelia accepted the apology with a small nod. "Thank you for saying it." But she did not say the words everyone expected. She did not tell him everything was forgotten, because some wounds needed honesty before they could heal, others needed time. One apology could not return months of fear. One apology could not erase the moment when she had stood alone, but it could begin something different. Responsibility. After Lord Everard spoke, others followed. Not all. Some remained silent. Some left the hall without admitting anything, but enough people spoke. Enough people recognized what had happened. The room changed, not through anger, not through revenge, through recognition. Then Lady Corisande stepped forward. The movement immediately drew attention. Everyone waited. Amelia looked at her. For years, Lady Corisande had controlled every conversation by preparing the words before anyone else could speak. Now she had no prepared speech. Only herself. "I was wrong." The words were quiet, almost too quiet. "But they were real," she continued. "I believed that if I lost control of Ashcombe, I would lose everything." Her eyes moved across the room. "I spent so much time protecting my position that I forgot what respect was supposed to mean." A painful silence followed. It was not the apology Amelia had imagined. It was not perfect. It did not explain every choice. It did not undo every injury. But it was the first time Lady Corisande had admitted that she had caused harm. Amelia looked at her. "I believe you were afraid." Lady Corisande's expression changed slightly. "But fear does not excuse everything." The older woman lowered her eyes. "No, it does not." That was the closest thing to surrender she could offer, and perhaps it was the most honest thing she had said. The consequences came naturally afterward. No one announced Lady Corisande's fall. No one needed to. Society rarely destroyed people with dramatic declarations. It simply changed its behavior. The invitations became fewer. The conversations became shorter. The doors that once opened immediately now required patience. The same world that had rewarded her confidence now questioned it. But Amelia did not celebrate. She had once known what it felt like to be abandoned by a room full of people. She would not wish that feeling on anyone, even someone who had caused her pain. Lady Corisande eventually left Ashcombe, not escorted away, not publicly disgraced. She left with dignity still intact, because Amelia insisted that justice did not require cruelty. The estate records were corrected. The agreement with Eleanor Whitmore was honored. The money that had been hidden was returned. And Eleanor, who had once been treated as though she had no place in respectable society, was welcomed again, not because people suddenly became kinder, but because they could no longer pretend they did not know the truth. Amelia remained at Ashcombe, but she was no longer the same woman who had walked through those halls after her father's death. She studied the estate accounts every morning. She worked with the managers. She learned the practical details her father had once believed only a son needed to understand. Fields, workers, payments, repairs, the endless responsibilities that kept a household alive. She made mistakes. Of course she did. Everyone did. But when she made them, they belonged to her. That mattered. She was no longer living a life designed by someone else. One winter afternoon, she returned to the chapel garden. The same path where she had once carried flowers to Eleanor. The frost covered the ground. The trees were bare. The air was cold. But the garden no longer felt like a place of loneliness. Near the path stood a small bench. Beside it grew a simple bed of winter flowers. Not rare flowers, not expensive flowers. The same kind of flowers that had once seemed too ordinary for a noble household. The Duke of Valancrest found her there. He stood beside the garden wall, watching quietly. "You chose these flowers deliberately," Amelia smiled. "Yes." "Why?" "Because everyone notices grand things. Few people notice what survives quietly." The Duke looked toward the chapel. "You have changed, Ashcombe." Amelia shook her head. "No. Ashcombe was changed because people finally chose to see what was already there." He smiled faintly. "A different answer than I expected." Amelia looked at the flowers. She had spent so long believing strength meant never needing anyone. Now she understood something else. Strength was not refusing kindness. It was knowing kindness did not make you weak. Years later, visitors to Ashcombe would still hear stories about the young woman who brought flowers to a forgotten widow. Some told the story as a tale of scandal. Others told it as a tale of inheritance. But those who truly understood remembered something simpler. A person's character was revealed not when everyone was watching. It was revealed when no reward was promised. Amelia had given flowers because Eleanor was lonely, not because she expected a letter, not because she expected justice, not because she expected the attention of a duke. She had done it because someone needed kindness. And that small act had opened the first door toward the truth. The greatest inheritance was never the estate, never the money, never the title. It was the courage to remain compassionate in a world that often rewarded cruelty. After all, a person's true worth is never measured by the doors that open for them, but by the doors they choose to open for others. If this story moved you, please remember to like, subscribe, and support the channel so more stories of courage, dignity, and justice can continue to reach those who believe kindness still matters. But the story of Ashcombe did not end with the restoration of documents or the return of money. The greatest change happened quietly. It happened in the way Amelia treated the people who worked beneath the same roof where she had once felt powerless. The old servants noticed it first. There were no longer separate worlds within the manor. The dining room was still grand, the library was still reserved for important matters. The hall still carried the history of generations, but the people who kept Ashcombe alive were no longer invisible. Amelia remembered what it felt like to stand in a room where everyone saw her but no one truly saw her. She would never allow another person to feel that way. Years after the events that changed Ashcombe, Mrs. Finch found Amelia in the kitchen one winter morning. The housekeeper held an old envelope. "I thought you should have this," she said. Amelia looked at it with curiosity. "Where did you find it?" "Among my things. I have kept it for many years." The handwriting on the envelope was familiar. Lady Corisande's. Amelia opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter, not a request, not an excuse. An admission. Lady Corisande wrote that she had often wondered what her life would have become if she had chosen honesty before control. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not ask to return. She only wrote that she finally understood something she had spent years refusing to accept. A person could protect their position so fiercely that they eventually lost the very respect they wanted to preserve. Amelia folded the letter. She felt no satisfaction, only a quiet sadness, because the woman who had once tried to erase her had finally discovered the truth too late. Power could force people to obey, but it could never force them to respect you. That evening, Amelia walked through the garden near the chapel. The flowers were still there, the same simple flowers, the ones that had started everything. The Duke of Valancrest joined her beside the path. "You are thinking about the past." Amelia smiled slightly. "Sometimes. Do you regret it?" She looked toward the chapel, the place where she had once stood alone, the place where the truth had finally been heard. "No. I regret that people had to suffer before they were willing to listen. But I do not regret choosing kindness." The Duke looked at the flowers. Then perhaps that was the greatest victory. Amelia considered his words. She knew the estate would continue changing. New generations would arrive. New challenges would appear. There would always be people who valued appearance over truth. There would always be those who believed kindness was weakness. But she had learned something that could not be taken from her. A gentle person was not a powerless person. A quiet voice was not an unimportant voice. And a small act of compassion could travel farther than any command spoken from a grand hall. The winter wind moved through the garden. The candles inside Ashcombe glowed warmly through the windows. For the first time, the cold outside no longer felt like a punishment. It simply felt like another season passing, and Amelia knew that the house she had once feared losing had never truly been made of stone, titles, or inheritance. It had been made of the people who chose to protect one another. Many years later, when a young servant girl at Ashcombe made a mistake in the household accounts, she expected anger. She expected the cold silence that had once filled the manor. Instead, Amelia invited her into the library. The girl stood nervously beside the desk where so many decisions had once been made without Amelia's voice. "I am sorry, my lady," she whispered. "I have caused trouble." Amelia looked at the corrected figures before her. "A mistake is not a failure," she said. "Refusing to learn from it would be." The young servant looked surprised, because she had expected punishment, not guidance, and in that small moment, the lesson of Ashcombe continued. The house that had once protected secrets now protected honesty. The rooms that had once carried whispers now carried conversations. The people who entered its doors were no longer judged only by their position, but by the choices they made. Outside, the winter garden remained full of simple flowers beside the chapel path. Flowers that had once seemed too ordinary to matter. Flowers that had changed everything. And whenever Amelia walked past them, she remembered that justice did not always begin with power. Sometimes, it began with one person deciding that another person's pain was worth noticing.